Órale! Bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFB podcast. I'm your host, Jorge Martin, and we are live on YouTube, Familia. Please make sure to give us a like and subscribe. Por favor, we'd really appreciate it. We're getting close to 100 subscribers, and you know that means that we're going to be able to change our address. So, por favor, give us a like and subscribe. Also, we are a proud member of the Fantasy Points Media Group. You got some of the best fantasy football coverage on there. You got Greg Cosell, Graham Barfield, John Hansen, Scott Barrett. Ay, Dios mío. The names just keep going. Joe Dolan, Tom Brawley, Wes Huber, some of the best fantasy minds out there with some of the greatest content, coming up with new data and research tools that are just going to help you win your fantasy leagues. You've also got a college football subscription. You've got golf. I mean, the US Open just happened. Familia. Get yourself a subscription, and when you do, hey, you know what? Guess what happens? We'll get you 10% off. Go to fantasypoints.com, put in the promo code Familia22 or Familia22 if you want to do it in Spanish, and get 10% off. And in fact, you get the NFL prospect guide. You still get some great information. In fact, we're going to talk about a couple of NFL prospects that just came out. So, Familia, this is a big one. BillsMafia, you're coming strong. I'm expecting you to come strong on this one. This is a big episode. I tell you, we got mi amigo, return guest. I'm telling you, this NFL Insider Series has been fantastic. It is just, I mean, people have been coming back. They want to keep coming back and talk some fantasy. This is Greg Tompsett. You know, he is the host and the founder, president, El Hombre, with the cover one. So you got fantasy football coverage. You got BillsMafia coverage. BillsMafia, go Bills. You got draft coverage. I mean, you're coming to him for advice in the next couple months because we are getting into redraft season. Familia, let's give him a like and subscribe. And let's just all together. Greg, mi amigo, bienvenido. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Looking forward to it. It was a lot of fun last year, and looking forward to diving in again. It's a lot more fun to talk about Bills nowadays than most of my history here. So now it's exciting that people want to reach out and be able to talk about the Bills. That's new for us.
It is. And you know, I got one question first off. So they're coming up with a new stadium, and I have you heard why they didn't want to put a retractable roof on it after some of the cold games?
I honestly think a lot of it was the budget, like how much it was going to be. And then there's some element where people like to talk about the home field advantage and things like that. But I think it's kind of crazy. I would have preferred that they had that. I do think they're going to do kind of a halo effect where there's going to be coverage for the fans and things like that, but a little more open on the field. So we'll see what they end up coming up with. But I think it's still going to be a really nice stadium, a great setup. But yeah, I personally would have loved to have a retractable roof.
Yeah, because, hey, you know what? With number 17, you're expecting to see games happening in January for a long time, hopefully the next 10 to 15 years. And you want to see those games. You want to see him. I mean, obviously there were some games. I mean, the game against the Patriots where he was still on fire, and it was like what was it, like 2 degrees?
Yeah, literally like 2 degrees. Brian Fitzpatrick taking his shirt off in the stands. There's always a famous video that goes around. But yeah, putting up 7 straight touchdown drives when it's 2 degrees out, it's kind of hard to argue with the results. So I guess they figure out a way to make it work.
Well, speaking of results, number 17, Josh Allen. I mean, the man is a stud. He is clear 2 years in a row, QB1. And I mean, he is Cam Newton from the running standpoint, and the passing side. I mean, right now he's as good as anybody out there. And I mean, what have you heard that he's working on? It's hard to improve on number one, but we know that these guys to be great, who want to be great, still continue to work on things. What is it that he's working on?
So that's one of my favorite parts about Josh Allen is his constant interest and willingness in wanting to improve, wanting to strip things down and rebuild the mechanics and control. So, last year he talked a lot about more accuracy and touch, and obviously we saw improvements there. This year he's talked a lot about timing and placement to be able to create more yards after catch. So, I certainly, each of the last couple of years, he's made significant strides in how he's approached his offseason and worked on things. So I believe that's going to be a focus. And I also think that some direction from new offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey, that was an area that, even though the Bills offense has been really explosive the last 2 years, they've actually been very low, like near the bottom of the league in yards after catch for that. So that's just more opportunity that if you can set that up. Some of that is creating a screen game, which I'm guessing we'll get to here in a little bit with another player they added. But putting players in position where they have more opportunity to run after they get the ball. And I think that's going to be an area of focus this year.
So you talked about Ken Dorsey a little bit. He's taking over for Brian Daboll. Is there any? I just read an article about how in the Athletic talking about how there's an expectation that it's going to be fairly seamless. There might be some differences in little differences in the play calling. Anything you see different? Obviously, this is a former NFL quarterback, a very successful college quarterback. You still see a really, really heavy emphasis on the passing game, which means great things for Josh Allen.
Oh, for sure. For sure. One of the biggest reasons was that he has the job is, one, Josh Allen was advocating for him and wanted him to get that job. The reason was obviously personal comfort level, but also because it's going to keep the same language, the same scheme, the same setup. When you call a play, it's using the same terminology. Now, there is some understanding that Ken Dorsey does like two tight end sets a little bit more. So we might see a little bit more of that. They like to be able to do the play action and RPOs out of those kind of sets, more movement, maybe a little bit more motion in what they do. But I think that there's going to be 80% the same in what they do and some tweaks here or there. So they're still going to be one of the pass heaviest teams in the league. They're still going to be very heavy with RPO. And I think that we'll see similar from last year, where Josh Allen's not going to maybe run as often as he did early in his career. And last year you saw a little bit of impact there, but still, when you get those 3rd and 7s where like he's trying to find an open receiver and trying to find some open space, and then down in the red zone and specifically in those critical matchups and into the playoffs, he knows that's a weapon that he has in his bag. So are they going to try to discourage him from running as often on 1st and 10 and be like, hey, look, we got you some new weapons to check down to. It's okay to give him the ball. I do think that we'll see a little bit of an impact on his rushing totals, but he's still one of the most valuable red zone weapons in the NFL. He's still going to get the rushing touchdowns, and he's still going to have, maybe it's 350 or 400 yards rushing instead of 700 and 800 like he's had some years. But it's still going to be a nice contribution. So as a Bills fan, I'm good with that because I want him healthy for that run. But it is a nice bonus when he has some of those crazy overall games where it's 400 total yards.
And I mean, I don't think there's any crazier game than that game against the Chiefs in the playoffs. And it was just, I mean, that was one of the best games, especially one of the best finishes I've ever seen. It just shows that level that this guy can play at. And did it feel like there was even a greater level of consistency last year where this is a guy you can count on to be your QB1 this year and maybe someone that people can take an early draft pick on?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that there's any offense in the NFL that is more quarterback centric than the Bills offense. Like, he is the engine that drives that offense. And obviously, that we'll get into the running backs and receivers, and there's weapons around the offense, but he is the central point of everything that they do. And that's not changing or going anywhere. So he is going to be the driving force of absolutely everything that's there. Would they love to have a couple more blowouts that they could do the 4-minute offense in the second half and take a little bit of pressure off? Sure. I think they would love to have the reason to have more balance because you're salting away leads and things like that. But the reason you get those leads and the reason they put those points up is because they're going to put the ball in Josh Allen's hands and he's going to throw it around everybody. And that's just, I don't see anything changing dramatically from how he is the centerpiece of everything they do.
Definitely the centerpiece. One of the things that shifting over, let's shift over to the running backs
Okay.
real quick, because last year when we talked, you were one of the first people to be really high on Devin Singletary, which especially proved to be true at the end of the season.
Yeah.
He was very much a lead caballo, as we love to call on this show, bell cow back. Now they drafted in James Cook. How do you, and they're both going fairly similar in a fairly similar range in best ball drafts and dynasty. How do you see kind of like the touches being broken up between the two of them?
So for this year specifically, I think that Devin Singletary is still going to have a very prominent role. Definitely the vast majority of the carries. Now, the sneaky thing is last year, I don't think a lot of people would have expected there were actually 91 targets to running backs for the Bills last year. It was 50 to Singletary, 32 to Zach Moss, 9 to Matt Breida. And 91 targets to the running back group. I don't know that that's going to dramatically increase. It might go up a little bit. Maybe it's 100 or 110 total. But how they're divvied out and the fact that you had 41 of them that were between Moss and Breida, if you ask me, do I think Devin Singletary gets 50 targets again? I would take the under. I don't think it's 0. So now is that 20 or 30 instead? Maybe he's the Zach Moss of that role and he gets 20 to 30 targets along with the larger portion of carries, 150 plus in the carries. I would range it there. And then I would say James Cook coming in, I do think he takes Zach Moss's role. I think Zach Moss might be the, RB3 inactive on game day that sometimes over time TJ Yeldon was. And he's even got to beat out Duke Johnson because they signed Duke Johnson there. So he's got to beat out Duke Johnson for that RB3 role to even be in that spot. But last year they went into a lot of games with 2 active running backs because they have a fullback who can touch the ball. They have Tywan Jones who plays special teams. So as far as true running backs, they went into most games with just 2 guys. And that RB3 was normally game day inactive. So I would expect Zach Moss and Duke Johnson to be competing for that RB3 role, which most games will be game day inactive. So I think James Cook comes in and he will be more of, maybe it's 80 carries during the season. Maybe it's 4 to 6 carries a game. But I could see him taking, I don't think it's crazy that he could get 60 to 80 targets. They obviously made this a priority. Day one in free agency, they signed J.D. McKissick. He backed out on them with some weird stuff back and forth with the Washington front office. If anybody hasn't seen it, like Brandon Beane's like one of the coolest customers around. He never shows any emotion, and he got mad when it came up that they had a done deal. Washington had never made any kind of offer, and then all of a sudden they came back and said, "Oh, well, if you're going to sign for that, yeah, we would have matched that. We thought you were going to get more money. We'll match that deal if you want to come back." But, well, we already did this. It's done. It's negotiated. Like, once a team and a player have an agreement, you're not supposed to go back and forth any further. And unfortunately, he backed out on that. But what it ended up showing was very obviously that was a priority role that they wanted to add. And you have a new offensive coordinator, and you hear Josh's comments about wanting yards after the catch. You hear Brandon Beane's comments about wanting less wear and tear on Josh and more checkdowns to players. Well, to do that, you have to give him a weapon that is capable of doing those things. I think James Cook is that weapon. Now, from a 2022 redraft fantasy standpoint, I have a feeling it could evolve a little bit slowly at first, so I wouldn't jump the gun if you get him and he doesn't have 9 targets in the first game. But the reports out of mini camps are, it is impossible not to notice him on the field. He is so explosive, so fast, just nothing they've ever had before out of the backfield. Josh has already talked about it. I think over the season, this is going to evolve, and I don't think it's going to get to a James White level or some of those games, but there's going to be games where in the 2-minute drill with some of the off defenses that are really afraid of Gabe Davis and those guys beating them deep, and they're just going to give space, I think you're going to get checkdowns. And Aaron Cromer coming in as the offensive line coach has been a huge proponent of zone scheme and movement, getting guys out wide. That's what James Cook ran in college, and getting athletic offensive linemen who can get out in space on screens. And the Bills have had actually a notoriously bad screen game for a couple of years. I think adding that weapon in, I think James Cook is really going to benefit from that. So maybe a stash early in the season, maybe even somebody you try to go after to trade for early in the year with somebody else, maybe invest a high pick, and then it's not awesome in the first 4 weeks. He's the kind of guy you're going to want to go after. And in Dynasty, I really like it because unfortunately for Devin Singletary, it's a contract year. And they just invested that pick in James Cook, and they can always draft another guy later. I don't think they're going to extend him long term, so I would be cautious with Singletary in dynasty leagues, just because it's hard to know where he might land. But for redraft and for this year, I think Singletary is still going to be productive, and probably not terribly different than he was last year. Maybe not the peaks we saw at the end of the year. And then I think as the year goes along, we'll see more and more James Cook, and eventually he could be an exciting weapon.
No, and so, yeah. And, too bad for Zach Moss. Well, let's jump in. Yeah.
Without injury, I just don't know that Moss and Duke Johnson are not guys that I'll be going after besides the deepest of leagues. And it's pretty much just an injury stash.
Yeah, exactly. Injury stash, or you use up your fab if one of these, one of the first two guys gets hurt, and then, in week 10 or something like that. No, keep him healthy, especially please running backs, stay healthy. The receivers, Stefon Diggs, one of the best receivers in the NFL. And he had the phenomenal 2020 season. He still had a great 2021 season. Could he kind of be a little bit of a bargain this year with people being, I think it's kind of weird that he is, even in the second round.
It is weird that a guy who still was top 5 in targets, top 5 in catches, had a career high in touchdowns. And it was like, oh man, that was kind of disappointing. It was only 103 catches for 1,225 yards and 10 touchdowns. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, I guess it was 1,500 yards the year before. So I guess it was technically a step back, but 103 for 1,210 touchdowns, pretty darn good season. Yeah. So I think that's the range we're going to see. I think he's not going to go down targets. So the last 2 years it's been 160, 170. So he's a lock for 150 plus high end in targets. He's just the defenses are so afraid of everything they can do that he gets so many of these easy 10-yard comebacks during the year because there's such crazy off coverage that 3, 4, 5 times a year it's just free, or per game it's free yards. So when you look at some of the consistency ratings that guys do, Stefon Diggs is almost always at the very top of the list because every game it's 5 for 50 as a bare minimum, and then also he can have the crazy explosive games. I think we'll continue to see that. I think he'll be right there. I do think one of the biggest debates amongst Bills Mafia and content creators in the Bills area is, what is the target distribution going to be? Obviously, Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders, it was 184 targets last year between the two of them. I talked about the piece for the running backs that I think some people are like, oh, well, it's going to go to James Cook. I'm like, well, there was already 91 targets to the running backs. Maybe that goes up a touch, but that's 10 or 15 of those. But I think you have two players in the Bills offense who last year, Dawson Knox had 71 targets and Gabe Davis had 63. I don't think Gabe Davis all of a sudden, launches to 120, but I do think he gets up to 100. And it's possible it could go above there. Jamison Crowder is the odds-on favorite to win the slot job, but I wouldn't completely discount Isaiah McKenzie. I would bet on Jamison Crowder winning that job, but I think Isaiah McKenzie still has a role in that offense in the same way we talked about. You can see the drumbeat of the strategy with, they went after McKissick, and when they lost out of McKissick, they signed Duke Johnson, and then they drafted James Cook. Okay, that role matters. Well, They re-signed Isaiah McKenzie. They signed Jamison Crowder. They drafted Khalil Shakur. They just brought in Tavon Austin to be there. So that gadget, quick slot guy is obviously a priority for them, that they want the depth and availability and talent to be able to be available there. So I don't know that any of them, even if Crowder wins the job, I don't know that Crowder gets the 112 targets that Beasley got last year. I could see him maybe being 80, 90, maybe 100. But having that job, I think that Isaiah McKenzie either way will go up from the 26 he had. But I think the two biggest beneficiaries will be Gabe Davis and Dawson Knox. I think both of them push from the 60 and 70 they had last year up to the 90 to 100 range. And I would guess that it'll be in that range where Diggs is still way up there, and maybe he's 150 instead of 164. I think that Gabe Davis goes up from 60 up to 100, maybe 110 targets. Then I think you'll have Crowder and Knox right there in the next one, somewhere between 80 and 100. And then I think you'll have James Cook somewhere in the 70 to 80 range. And obviously when Josh Allen's throwing the ball 600 times, there's plenty of that, and I don't think that's going to go down at all. If anything, Ken Dorsey's joked about that he has to remember to run the ball here and there, just because he's quarterback and that's his history, and he knows what a weapon he has in Josh Allen. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see how those things work their way out, but I think you're going to see the Stefon Diggs still be maybe, if nothing else, a lower end RB1, but still a strong, super consistent wide receiver one. And then you're going to see Gabe Davis, I think, as a really nice wide receiver two, where you're going to be able to have some nice upside games and some opportunity. But I won't be shocked if he's now consistently in that wide receiver two range. And then I actually think Jamison Crowder is going to be a nice and steady. Nobody was excited to start Cole Beasley last year, but when you're in a bye week and like all of a sudden you be like, oh, hey, look, I got 7 for 70. And it's nice to be able to get that. And he still scored a couple touchdowns, still had some of those nice games. I think Crowder will be like that, where there'll still be some steady ones, and that wide receiver group's going to be good. If anything, I'm a little bit nervous about the outside depth behind Diggs and Davis. There isn't it would be guys like Crowder or Khalil Shakur, who Shakur I didn't mention. I do think there's too much veteran depth in front of him for this year, but I love him as a dynasty stash. I think he's a really nice find. Crowder's on a 1-year deal. McKenzie's just on a 1-year deal. There's an opportunity for him to be the slot receiver of the future, but I think there's too much veteran depth in front of him to really have an impact short of injury in 2022. But I do like him a lot as a potential guy long-term and a stash in dynasty.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that this wide receiver class is going to have to remind us of the way things used to be, which is, maybe a guy breaks out in the second half. We're not going to have a Jamar Chase. We're not going to have Justin Jefferson.
We got spoiled with those two years in a row.
Yeah, those guys are potentially Hall of Famer on Hall of Fame trajectories already. I got one question specifically about Gabe Davis. Is his, with that 4 touchdown game in that electric playoff game against the Chiefs,
keep reminding me of that game. It's so painful.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It was still a fun game.
It's so hard when every person I interact with that's not a Bills person, that's the first thing that comes up is, oh my God, it's like the most fun game I've ever watched. I'm like, yeah, I know. It's not the same when your team lost the most fun game that everybody else has ever watched. But yeah, you're right. It is. I've rewatched it a couple times, and obviously the last 13 seconds is painful, but that final couple minutes is historic. It's no one will ever forget
it. But did that maybe heat up Gabe Davis a little bit too much? Are you worried that his balloon is going to go up too high when it comes to the ADP when we're getting into late July and especially August?
A little. We're all humans. Recency bias is real. Like, it's impossible not to see that. And now, if people look at that and anyone has any idea that, he could take over as the wide, because in that game, it was basically the Chiefs bracketed and sometimes triple covered Stefon Diggs to the point where they had to go somewhere else, and they went somewhere else to the tune of whatever 225 yards and 4 touchdowns to Gabe Davis. So it's not like it was some effective defensive scheme, because Diggs and Davis combined had 250 yards and 4 touchdowns, which you would take any day. So I don't think all of a sudden teams are going to deploy that crazy bracket structure that Kansas City did in the playoff game to Stefon Diggs. So if it's people looking at that saying, oh, maybe that's an indicator that Gabe Davis is actually going to be a 1A and 1B to Stefon Diggs, and maybe some games he's the wide receiver one, I just don't see it. And just, again, as a reminder, last year, Stefon Diggs had 164 targets and Gabe Davis had 63. He had 101 more targets than Gabe Davis. Now, maybe that closes the gap. I do think Davis jumps to 100 and maybe Diggs is 150 instead of that. But they're not both going to be 125. It's not going to be a 1A, 1B. Stefon Diggs is the number one receiver. They just gave him a huge extension to be incredibly highly paid for the rest of his career here in Buffalo. So I like Gabe Davis a lot. Obviously, there's an efficiency element of his game that's very intriguing of what he can put up when he gets opportunities. But like everyone, we're probably going to see a little bit of offset with an increase in targets and probably a little decrease in the efficiency. And that I think he's going to be a really nice receiver in the way that Adam Thielen's had really nice seasons with Justin Jefferson, but it's still based on the seasons where he's getting the really nice red zone share and it's going well, it works well, but then you're also going to have some games with 3 for 36 and that's it. Like, that's all you're going to get. And the Gabe Davis is still going to have that. He's still refining his game as a route runner. He's still refining his game, creating separation consistently throughout the game. And yes, it is nice that he's the biggest receiver on the Bills. Is still going to be a red zone target. I don't think he's going to fall down to some like low. I think he'll still be a above average touchdown receiver, but I don't think he's all of a sudden in for some 100 catch season. I don't see that. I think that it'll be more in the 60 to 70 catch range, but with a good yards per catch and probably over 1,000 yards receiving. But again, he had 549 yards last season. I think people grab that playoff game in their mind and think, oh, he was on the verge of 1,000-yard season. But well, like, he still had a lot of iffy games last year.
Yeah, it's still. It's still growth. It's
still
growth.
Yeah.
Now, you gave a really good breakdown on Dawson Knox. I know he came a lot further last year than a lot of people had expected before the season.
I was on teams that trade for Zach Ertz. I wanted them to go get Zach Ertz.
I remember that. Yeah. With him, do you see? I mean, he could be a back end tight end one this year. Is it pretty very possible?
Yes, I do think that the only person that would threaten Gabe Davis's stance as the primary red zone weapon is Dawson Knox. And, Knox, you're talking about a guy who's 6'5", 260 and is, from a athletic standpoint, is on like the Darren Waller level. He's a better athlete than George Kittle and Travis Kelce were. He is a like elite freak level athlete. But he had also, he just learned to play tight end when he went to college. He had never even played in high school, quarterback in high school, and then moved to tight end, and then was in a super weird Ole Miss offense that had DK Metcalf and all the other guys that were at Ole Miss at the time, and obviously AJ Brown, and then DeMarcus Lodge, and it was all kinds of other guys who were there. So he didn't get a lot of targets, had pretty poor quarterback play. And then comes to the NFL and then is learning one of the most complex offenses in the NFL where Brian Daboll uses the tight ends a lot. So last year, my desire for Zach Ertz, which is well known amongst Bills fans, was not instead of Dawson Knox. It was a hedge on, hey, I hope Dawson Knox takes a step forward, but I don't want to depend on Tommy Sweeney as our tight end if Knox isn't ready. I want an alternative to that. So I want him plus Dawson Knox and just hope that we then have a luxury of a great veteran guy who we don't need as much because our tight end broke out. Well, instead, they put all their eggs in that basket, and he did. He had a really nice season, 9 touchdowns, obviously floated a lot of that, but in the Bills offense, there's a lot of touchdowns to go around. So of course that could regress. Maybe it's 6 instead of 9, but I don't think he all of a sudden falls down to 2 touchdowns or something like that. The key is, will he get an increase on the 71 targets? And I do think he's right there. I do think he's one of the guys that, especially that intermediate and seam routes that we saw Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders run, I do think Knox will be more of that guy. I think they'll run some 2 tight end sets where instead of Knox being the one to stay into block, it'll be OJ Howard staying into block with Knox going out in the route and running up the seam. And I do think he's really worked on his leverage and zone coverage to be able to get open for, those 3rd and 6th conversions that you need. And I think that we see a nice season. And I know it comes up all the time. Bills fans love Dawson Knox. He's a very likable player. They actually just did a really cool thing where they sent the Bills in-house crew down to his hometown in Nashville and did a week's worth of coverage on like his family and his grandparents and he has 2 adopted brothers and just a really cool story on everything. So he's very likable, but Bills fans think he's already a top 5 tight end. And I have to remind them, I'm like, yes, he did lead he led all tight ends in touchdowns, which is great, but he was 18th in catches and 15th in yards. So that's going to be the key, is can he jump from the 71 targets to the 90 targets, 100 targets, where then he goes from 49 catches up to 65 catches. And that's where I think the range we'll see. I don't think he's not going to get the target share of Kittle's crazy year or Kelsey or even Waller when he's healthy. But I think he can be right behind them. And that, do I think it's crazy that he could have a better season than a Dallas Goedert or someone like that? I don't think I would pick Goddard to have more, but I think that's the range he could get into that TJ Hawkinson, Dallas Goedert range. I think he could be there in that 4th, 5th to 7th tight end range if things go the right way. And I do think that if you stack up on running backs and receivers early on, which I'm sure you advise your people to do, and you're taking some stabs at who's this year's Dalton Schultz, who's this year's breakout guy. I do think Dawson Knox could be a really nice dart throw to grab later. Pair him up with another one, grab him and Hayden Hurst, grab him and somebody else, and I think you could come out with a really nice tight end one by the end. I think we might have lost Jorge there for a minute. I wasn't sure if it was me or if it was Jorge. Pengs or any of the guys in the chat, you guys have any questions about the Bills? I'll be happy to answer any. Wait for Jorge to jump back on. So, overall with the Bills, I do think Josh Allen could still be QB1 overall, but deserves to be one of the top ones drafted. I do think Stefon Diggs can still be a very steady, healthy wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1 at the lower end of wide receiver 1. I think Gabe Davis, if you get him at the right spot, can be really valuable. I'm seeing him go crazy early, and that scares me a little bit, but I think there's still a lot of opportunity that way. But we'll see where that goes. I think Dawson Knox can be a sneaky one to be able to go. Peng's here asking wide receiver 3 possibilities. People are in on Crowder, but I'm seeing Isaiah McKenzie. Yeah, I think it's 80-20. I think it's more likely that Jamison Crowder wins that job, but it's not a slam dunk. And I think that Isaiah McKenzie's going to have a role no matter what in gadget plays, jet sweeps, quick bubble screens, and some of the plays that way. Plus, there's a chance he could beat out Jamison Crowder straight up for the slot role. And Jamison Crowder, there's no guarantee he'll stay healthy. So I think there's reason to stash McKenzie later, just because anytime you could all of a sudden have a starting element of this Bills offense, it's worth taking a stab at that. So I wouldn't bet on it that, oh, I have McKenzie and now I'm going to have the Bills starting slot receiver. I do think it's going to be Crowder, but if you can get McKenzie really cheap at the end of the draft, it's worth a dart throw to be able to grab him, just because you have a chance to have the upside of that Bills offense. We'll give Jorge one more minute here. I do think both the Bills defense and Tyler Bass as their kicker are worth drafting. The Bills have a tough schedule early on, so if you pair them with another unit, them and Cleveland pair really well together. Cleveland has a crazy easy first 5 games, and that could be a nice pairing, because then the Bills' schedule gets pretty easy over the second half through the stretch there. Peng's asking, is Gabriel Davis the number 2 for sure? His routes are usually deep to mid. I'm wondering if Knox moves to 2. I would bet. So I do think part of that with Emmanuel Sanders last year as being the number 2 receiver, and he was early on, was still because of Gabe Davis's development. You still have to remember he went to UCF. He was only going into his second year at UCF. He ran like virtually all fly and comeback routes. Like, that's all he did. There was not a lot of development or maturity to his route tree. So they needed other guys to do that. Davis came on as the year went. I do think that Crowder jumps in. I don't think he's going to take all of Cole Beasley's targets, but a good chunk of them. And then I think Emmanuel Sanders' targets goes kind of split between Gabe Davis and Dawson Knox, where both of them come forward. So I would bet that Davis has the second most targets on the team, but not a huge gap between him. Last year it was 112 for Cole Beasley and then down to 72 with Sanders and 71 for Knox and 63 for Davis. I don't see the number 2 receiver having a 40 target gap again. I think that it's going to be, Davis around 100 and Knox around 90 and even James Cook around 70 or 80, more so than a huge gap. And some of the people who think that Gabe Davis might have like 120, I do think that's a bit of a leap. All right. So I just talked to Jorge. Unfortunately, he did lose connection. So we'll wrap up here.
Greg.
Oh, hey, we got Jorge back. I was just answering questions from Pengs in the chat, in the comments, kind of floating through. So we filled in for you to fill some time.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. Peng is one of the best. He is a great best ball mind. I had him on a few weeks ago. Yes, very cool. He's very much a great best ball expert.
Yeah, he was grilling me on Emmanuel Sanders and whether that those if Gabe Davis will really be the number 2, and he had a good question on if Isaiah McKenzie was worth a stab, with everybody assuming Isaiah Crowder or the Jameson Crowder's the wide receiver 3.
Oh man! Well, now I'm going to have to go back and listen to this. So, 2 quick ones, real quick. You guys didn't get into the offensive line yet, right?
Nope. I wrapped up on Knox, and that was about it.
Peng, thank you again, mi amigo. Really appreciate it, puppy. Well, on the offensive line, ranked number 20, but it's been good enough, right? I mean, you don't. With a mobile quarterback like Josh Allen, it's almost like you don't need the top of the top, but. Where does this group going to be good enough?
So last year, Josh Allen, there's a couple different stats you can look at, like the evasiveness and escapability. There's different groups that do different metrics. He had the number 1 rating of number of sacks versus the number of pressures he faced, because he's just really hard to sack. So he's always going to make the offensive line look better than what they are. Not in the same way that Peyton Manning used to do that, where it didn't really matter how good the offensive line was. The ball was out so fast that it didn't matter. You couldn't get to him. Josh is the opposite. You can get to him. It's just really hard to take him down. So he hides a lot of the flaws of the offensive line. This year, they brought back all the core pieces. They did send Roger Saffold, who's a Pro Bowl guard for the Titans last year, to bring in at one of the guard spots. That's a nice upgrade over John Feliciano. Then they did. Chicago tried to steal Ryan Bates, who was kind of their sneaky developmental guy who came up and started the last 5 games of the year in the 2 playoff games. Chicago tried to sign him to a restricted free agent deal, and the Bills matched it. So they're bringing back everybody. Plus, they added David Quessenberry as kind of their swing tackle. He started all 17 games for the Titans last year. They added Greg Van Roten, Greg Mance, multiple kind of veteran depth guys, none of which you want to be playing for you every game. But when those are your 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, and 10th linemen, Cody Ford, their former 2nd-round pick, is like their 11th best lineman. Oh. The depth is the best we've had in a long time. So I think there's a couple different things. This is going to be the deepest line the Bills have had in 5 years. It's going to be the best offensive line that Josh Allen's ever had in front of him. And it's probably still barely above average. So they're not all of a sudden the 2016 Cowboys. Like they don't have some ridiculous, high level crazy talent. Deion Dawkins is probably borderline top 10 left tackle. Mitch Morris is probably like the 6th to 7th best center. And then Spencer Brown has a ton of potential at right tackle, but ultimately they're just going to be like an above average offensive line. But with Josh Allen and the weapons, above average is probably enough.
Awesome. I'm gonna answer a couple questions from Peng. Okay. So talking about you want to go back and listen to the early part, yeah, because he definitely broke down the Devin Singletary role. In a nutshell, you want Devin Singletary on your team. Yeah. So
especially with how much people are. James Cook's going to have a role, but I think people are assuming Devin Singletary is gone, and he's still very much going to be the primary back. I think he's going to have 150 plus carries and 30 plus targets, and still be a nice chunk of this offense.
Yeah, and he also and he's expecting James Cook to have some big, a really nice role. Yeah. Not so much in the running game, but definitely in the passing game. Greg Cosell that's his favorite receiving running back out of this class. On the defensive side, the addition of Von Miller is going to be big for the pass rush. I'm being a Ram fan, I saw what he did to really, amp up that pass rush. Is this going to be and with Tre'Davious White, who's going to be about 9 months, a little more than 9 months out of his injury? They say that's like the cutoff point. I always kind of think 10 months is the minimum, just because they always end up erring on that. Is this still expected to be a team that's pretty formidable against the pass?
Yeah, very much so. So, I mean, no matter what, you still have Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, who, for my money, is the best safety combo in the league. They have first-round pick Kaiir Elam, who is added in. Plus, bringing back Dane Jackson, who started a ton of games down the stretch when Trey White was out last year. I hope they're on the cautious side with Trey White. This year, they did change. The PUP list is now 4 weeks instead of 6 weeks. So I do think we could maybe see him start on the PUP list and maybe come back for week 5. I think that's possible, but it's possible he's ready. We've seen it in different areas. Some guys respond differently than others. So it's hard to know exactly when he'll be back, but with all of that, you then have 2 great coverage linebackers in Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds. And now all the young investments they've made the last couple of years on the defensive line, drafting Greg Rousseau, Carlos Basham, AJ Epinesa, Ed Oliver now having more defensive tackles around him. You bring in Tim Settle and Daquan Jones and Jordan Phillips. And now you put Von Miller opposite them. It's the first time they've ever had someone who really pulls that gravity for those double teams and all the attention, where now instead of Ed Oliver getting all the double teams, he's going to get single blocking for the first time in his career. You're going to have, not only in practice and in the mentorship that they're going to get, the domino effect of Von Miller, they're going to get the on-field domino effect of him pulling all the attention and double teams that way. So I think we're going to see a really nice step forward. A lot of the people around the team are very excited about Gregory Rousseau and how good he's looked so far coming back, really taking care of his body and focusing on that development for the first time and growing into that crazy 6'8" frame that he has. He's a freak of nature. That dude's enormous. I think that it's going to be exciting. So last year they were the number one pass defense in the NFL. I don't know that they'll be number one again, but they're still going to be pretty darn good. You have those two guys in the back end as a safety net, and now you add Von Miller going after quarterbacks on the front. Once Trey White's back, I think they're still going to be a really dynamic defense.
Yeah, and this is a defense that, hey, you know what? They want to be great in January, not not earlier in the season. How about against the running game? I always like to ask about against the running game.
It's been an issue for a couple of years because they've been, that's one of the things when Sean McDermott is solely focused on building the best pass defense in the NFL. That's what he wants. When you do that, a lot of those kind of players don't help in the run game. Like the Bills are a base nickel. They play nickel. It doesn't matter how many people you bring out on the field. They're staying in nickel defense. Taron Johnson's a good tackler, but he's not a third linebacker. They had a lot of quick penetrating defensive tackles, but not from the run defense standpoint. So this year they did spend a good chunk of money getting Daquan Jones, who's a great one tech and a really stout run defender. Tim Settle and Jordan Phillips are more rotational defensive tackles, but nice as your third and fourth defensive tackle. Ed Oliver is a very strong run defender. Von Miller is actually a sneaky underrated run defender. He's actually a very good run defender. And his pass rush gets the attention, but he's actually an exceptional run defender. And last year, Gregory Rousseau, his pass rush was, coming along slowly and developing, but he was actually a phenomenal run defender right off the bat. So we're hopeful that just having more depth in how they do it, they're not going to change. They're still going to be a base nickel defense. They're still going to have a lot of DBs on the field every play, but having 4 good defensive tackles instead of 1 or 2, having a guy that you added in and go from a negative run defender in Jerry Hughes or Mario Addison now being Von Miller, and then another year forward from Gregory Rousseau, I do think that we see a step forward. So maybe it'll be above average in run defense. It might not be elite, but it won't be a problem like it was in some games in the past.
So I got 2 last ones. The first one, the last football question. The Chiefs are one of the Super Bowl favorites.
Yeah.
How is BillsMafia handling that?
It's one of those things where every Bills fan will tell you last year, like, we felt we had the better team. We beat them in the regular season. We scored what should have been the winning touchdown with 13 seconds left. We thought we had them. It just shows that they're on that level, but until you beat them in the playoffs in a game that matters, it just is what it is. That so they lost Tyreek Hill. We added Von Miller. I think that things either closed the gap even further or trended even a little bit in our direction, but ultimately it's just not going to matter until the playoffs. There's going to be a key, the Tony Romo, Jim Nantz 425 game is going to be between the Bills and the Chiefs. Everybody's going to be watching it. And even that game, it doesn't really matter. The Bills beat them in the regular season last year. All that's going to matter is, can you beat them in the playoffs when it really matters? And we're not going to know that until we see it in January. So I still think that they are on that caliber and on that par. I think those are the 2 best teams in the AFC and maybe in the league, right? Tampa Bay and LA right there in that running. But ultimately it won't matter. Anything we say or get frustrated by or anything Chiefs fans say, it won't matter until we see it in January.
Yeah, another game that I got circled on my calendar is Week 17 Monday Night Football. Yeah, with the Bengals. I think there's going to be. Yeah. I think that's that being championship week for fantasy football. I think it's going to be a big.
And that's the closer. That's the Monday night, like the closing game of fantasy football season is Bills Bengals Monday night. That's crazy. That's a really fun one to have. There'll be an awful lot of games decided on. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Burrow and Mixon versus, Allen and Diggs and Davis and Cook and everybody. So maybe Devin Singletary will decide championships.
You never know. Yeah. I love it. Closing it out. We talked a lot about fantasy, some tacos last year. Any New Mexican food discoveries for you?
So I'm learning more and more about how much I love more of there's so many like good healthy options. I'm trying to take care of myself a little bit better. And trying to find I've discovered I love guacamole and
Yes.
can't possibly get enough of it, and just some of the nice different things you can do with some good salads and things like that. So I'm trying to take care of myself a little bit more, and discovering that I can still get some good spice in my life without having to sacrifice everything.
Oh, awesome. Love it. Yeah, guac, you forget how versatile it is.
Yeah.
Some good hey, you know what? Some good pinto beans in the
Yeah.
boiled pinto beans. That great source of fiber and protein.
100%.
Those
100%. Adding in stuff like that is a fantastic way
oh,
to still have some good flavor and not have to. It doesn't always have to be all tortillas and cheese. I want both of those things in everything that I do, and I still eat plenty of it. But trying to find some other options that don't have to center around that
uh,
is always a challenge.
awesome. Awesome. Mi amigo, thank you again for, kind of subbing in there.
Yeah, for sure.
Give us a plug what you got. This is going to be a big couple months for you.
Yeah, we're excited. We're actually getting ready to do a full relaunch over at our website at cover1.net. You can download the Cover One app. The easiest place to usually find us is on their YouTube channel. You can search for Cover One. We have, obviously, I center mostly on the Bills, but we have a lot of guys who do fantastic work on the fantasy side of things, maybe even a little bit of gambling, advice, and a lot of stuff on the draft as well. So obviously a whole lot for the Bills. So anytime you need any updates on the Bills, come and find us. But we have a lot of stuff beyond that, and we're excited about the relaunch we're doing with our website and everything that we'll be seeing forward. Brought on a lot of new writers, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun for fans.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, familia, this is todo for our show. We went a little longer because we had a little guest appearance there. And thank you for all for sticking around with us through the Wi-Fi. Muchas gracias. Again, make sure when you're going to fantasypoints.com, use the promo code Familia22, Familia22, 10% off any subscription, anything that you got, pro football, college football, golf, got it all. Also, you can find me at Jorge Martin 17 and Familia FFB at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Also, make sure you're subscribing. You can check out the audio at Apple, Google, Spotify. Thank you to Anchor for putting us out there. And again, familiafb.com. We're going to have a lot of content, a lot of, there's going to be a lot of previews based on this NFL Insider Series. We're going to get everybody done by the early part of training camp. Ojalá. People have been coming through, like El Señor Greg Tompsett. Thank you so much, familia. Please make sure to give us a like and subscribe on YouTube. And remember, todos somos familia. Salud.